We're good? Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, not quite evening yet, for the special school board meeting here on August 8th. If you have the agenda in front of you, item number 1 deals with our 5 strategies. Item number 2 discusses our face covering policy. And item number 3 is our call to order. Ms. Steeves, will you please determine if we have a quorum present?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do.
Okay, thank you. Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Bellingham, thank you for leading us in the pledge.
You're welcome.
Okay, this brings us to item number 4, the approval of the agenda. Before I entertain a motion to approve this, really we have this special meeting for one purpose today, and it's to discuss and look at approving one of the 6 different potential levy resolutions, if you will, or whatever that might look like. So if people are okay with it, I think it makes sense. We're going to have Mr. Gertis give the levy presentation, which would be item number 5. But we really need to decide if we're going to move forward on something tonight and to make sure that we are clear on this. So if the board is okay with it, I would like the board to give flexibility on resolution 23-08, 09, 010, 11, 12, and 13. And maybe they don't get made in that order. And so I guess what I'm saying is we know them in the packet as being presentation or levy option number 1 through 6. And if somebody likes a certain number and wants to make a motion on a certain number, maybe not starting with number 1, whatever that may look like, we could then look to vote on that one first. My concern would be is if we don't have a consensus and we get through all 6 of these, now what are we going to do? Does that make sense? Because we really need to, if we are going to move forward with some type of a levy recommendation from the school board to the community, we do need to decide something tonight. We're just up against the calendar. So does that make sense? Am I clear on that? Mr. Bellingham?
I was going to make a motion.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of the agenda with the flexibility within the agenda.
Okay, thank you for that.
Second.
Any other discussion on that? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Thank you for that. Next item is number 5, the levy presentation. Mr. Gertis, if you'd come up and walk us through this, please. And once again, I apologize for my absence last week. Thank you to all board members and Mr. Gertis and Mr. Benty for going through the discussion that you did. And once again, thank you in advance for tonight and all the work that you and your teams have put into this. I know it's been a lot of work, and we thank you for that. So.
There it is. All right. Good evening, or I guess good afternoon. So I'm going to go through each of these options, as Chad alluded to, options 1 through 6. After each one of these options, because they are going to start to look alike, after a while I'm going to stop and pause and give everybody a chance to ask any questions or give any comments. Before I get started, I want to just point out, you guys have seen these models before. This model has a little bit different twist to it, so if you can see, if I can make this thing work.
Mr. Gertis, before you get further in, board members, I would just really encourage you to make sure that you ask any questions you need on each one of these, and also make notes of if you have a favorite 1 or 2 or none, whatever, just so that you can recall back to what you do like or don't like. So, thank you.
So, and I'm going to ask Mr. Casey if he could maybe remove me from the screen there so we can see the actual numbers. If that's possible. One, I don't like looking at myself. All right. So on these models, you're gonna see there's a line added here that says cuts needed to balance fund balance. So at the last board meeting, and a couple questions I received over last week, I was asked what would be the kind of the state of the state if something didn't pass. And while I can't directly answer that question, I did add some numbers to illustrate what would need to be cut over the next 4 years, fiscal year 24 through fiscal year 27, in order to maintain board policy at 9.5%. And so while that doesn't give you actual tangible items that would get cut, it at least gives you the dollar amount that would be estimated to look at based on that. So option one, I'm not loud enough? That's the first time somebody said that to me. Option one is renewal only. So as we've talked about in the past, this would give Faribault schools kind of an even amount of money for the existing referendum that is in place today and expires in fiscal year 25 or pay 24. So this maintains kind of the status quo. And all of the budgets and all of the long-term planning that you've seen come from me assume that this renewal is successfully completed. So again, if this is completed and approved, we're still looking at $1.6 million of cuts for next year, fiscal year 24. The new money, or the continuation of existing money, is right here. And again, maintaining status quo, we're looking at another 1.7, 1.2, and 1.2. The total of all of those numbers is just south of $6 million. Okay?
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, okay. The state funding formula, I know that's highly political, and we don't know what we can get, 0 or 2 or 3 or 4. I mean, what do we say about that line? I mean, what?
So this model, as well as all the other 5 you're going to see behind this, doesn't assume. This 2% for fiscal year 23 we know has already been approved. This model assumes just the 1%, right? It does not assume any cross-subsidy additions, which, we haven't seen in close to my lifetime, so it would be kind of a guess and a big stretch to assume that we would see it within the dates of this model. It does include a 1% average here in additional funding each of these years. Now keep in mind that 1% on the funding formula is roughly $260,000, $270,000. So we're not talking big money when we talk about 1% on the funding formula at Faribault.
Now, what if we don't get the 1%?
If we don't get this 1%, this number goes up by roughly $260,000. This number would go up by an additional $260,000. This would go up by an additional, because remember, it's compounding. So this 1% here is compounded on this 1% here and right on down the line.
Mr. Chair, Scott, how did you figure revenues, expenses? Is that projected at a 2% or a status quo? Does that also include reduced enrollment?
So that's a great question. So the revenue is based on the enrollment model that the board approved and that we went through back in March, I think it was. All right, so that's based on that. The expenses is based on 3% annual year over year. You will see that obviously from here to here is not 3%, because this number has been reduced for cuts to keep it at this 9.5% existing board policy today. All right, and that's what this number represents.
Thank you.
Year over year.
Okay.
Does that answer, Jerry?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Richard? Or maybe
So
I
you
can't
got
say that.
3% a year for raises?
Not just raises. That's 3% a year for all expenses. So while 80% roughly are salary and benefits, right? You know, of that 80%, roughly 56 to 58% are actually salaries. So that's about half of our total expenses on a given year is just in salaries. But we also in there have utilities, insurance costs, you know, all those things as well too. Based on the state of the state, I hope I can get by with 3%.
And we're not going to go below 9.5 for a fund balance, right?
That would take a board action
Right,
in order
yeah.
to do that.
Okay.
So this model assumes that the board will not go below that. If that changes, we'd have to update these models to reflect that. So any other questions on option 1, renewal of the existing referendum that expires pay 24? Otherwise, I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is option number 2. Again, looks the same. Across the top, we have the renewal as question 1 and a $302 per pupil unit operating referendum addition for question 2. Remember, this question is contingent on question 1. So 2 cannot pass without the approval of number 1. If we look down here, down below, again, everything's the same here. You can see here that number does not change. It's still 1.6 because there's no new money for fiscal year 24 in this model. The new money is in fiscal year 25. And that's where you see the roughly $980-some thousand drop from where it was to where it is right now.
Is this one question or 2 questions on this one?
2 questions. Again, question 2, contingent upon question 1. So if 1 gets voted down, 2 goes down with it, regardless of the vote.
Mr. Gertis, the 302 operating referendum, that is the same as what we've been talking before as the $90
Yeah.
annually on a $250,000 house.
$252,600 house. Yep, the
Correct.
average
Okay.
house. And that's based on pay 23.
Yep.
Right, the year that we're out there
Okay,
now.
thank you.
So question 1 could pass, question 2 could fail, and what happens?
This renewal for our
Yeah.
existing referendum would be extended for another 10
Okay.
years after the termination of the first 10 years.
Similar to option 1.
Correct. Exactly identical to option 1. Other than, Richard, these numbers would then go back to the last slide, right?
Okay.
Right? We'd still have roughly $6 million to cut if this does not pass. Okay? And again, this assumes, Richard, to your question before, that we stop at 9.5% board policy. And they all do, so they're all going to show the same thing going forward. Okay. So again, any questions on option 2, renewal of the existing operating referendum with another $302 per pupil unit added to it? Okay, and we'll move on to option 3. So option 3 is a little bit different. Question 1, again, is the renewal. That'll be the consistent theme that you're going to hear about all 6 of these options. And question 2 is going to be a tech levy. So just to back up a little bit, remember that the tech levy is taxed on all property values, not just the referendum market value. A tax levy is taxed on the net tax capacity of the school district. Okay? So what we have here is a tech levy that would actually give us new money in fiscal year 24. And you can see that 1.6 million here, that was here on the last slide, is now reduced to $381,000, right? Because the tech levy gives us roughly 1.366 million in added revenue in fiscal year fiscal year 24.
So 2 questions again.
Correct.
Now, with this option that you're actually taking from the original operating levy, that money we would spend for tech, right?
Yes, this money here, Richard, that's a great question, would have to be dedicated for anything that's allowable under state statute for technology purposes. And that's a pretty broad list.
I was going to ask you what's on that list.
So any technology staff, salaries and benefits, any obviously direct iPads or Chromebooks or whatever student use computers, any staff or board related technology that you might use today, any district software or hardware, networking equipment, switches, routers, servers, any firewalls for security infrastructure for the district, right? Keep the foreign hackers out of our system. I think those are the big ones. Copy machines, our existing copy machine lease that we have that we just started last year, that money could come out of this tech levy as well.
So both are be 10 years with the cost of inflation or whatever that terminology is.
Yep, so there's different costs of inflation for this, Richard. So the renewal is based on the Department of Education cost of inflation that we talked about last week, around the CPI index that they use. A tech levy is a percent of growth on the net tax capacity, because this is not based on per pupil units, it is based on a fixed dollar amount. So if you read the question in the ballot, the fixed dollar amount, which equates back to, Chad, your question of the $90 on the average house here in the district, is actually listed in the question. And so that's what would get levied, and then when net tax capacity goes up, this tech levy goes up as the same percentage. It's a percentage increase. Does that make sense, Richard?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So again, looking down here in the bottom, you can see that we have very small cuts for next year, for 24, and then there's no new money here in 25, so then we're kind of back into these increased spending. But again, total over 4 years goes down, right? We started at 6 or 5.8, then 4.8, now we're down to 4.5 over the course of those 4 years. Okay? Any?
Mr. Chair, sorry, Scott.
No.
You may have explained this, but the state funding formula reduction of 1 million, what, is that tied into what?
Say that one more time.
Okay,
Sure.
you got 1,050,000. What is that reduction?
That is based on what the board cut for fiscal year 23 that we're in today.
Okay.
That 1.50,000 here that just came back to life on the screen,
Yes.
that is what the board cut.
Okay.
And then this is what we decided to take out of fund balance for the current year that we're in 23.
Right.
That's for reference only.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, it's a good question. Okay, any other questions on option 3? Renew the existing operating referendum and add a tech levy to the tune of about $1.366 million. All right, going on to option 4, maybe. So option 4 now has 3 questions. All right, so the next 3 options that we're going to put up on the screen have 3 questions. Again, question 1 is the renewal. Okay, and question 2 is add $302 per pupil unit, again based on the $90 average house. And question 3 is to add an additional $302 per pupil unit for a total of $604 per pupil unit. Couple things with this option. You can see here that again, we're back to our 1.6 million where we started, right? Because there is no new money in this option for fiscal year 24, right? So that would require roughly 1.6 million in cuts. All the new money, this entire $604, comes into play in fiscal year 25 to align with the renewal. And you can see actually that this dollar amount pushes us over the break-even point. So this option would require no cuts. It actually brings the fund balance back up by 0.06%. Okay? No cuts required, fiscal year 25. And then again, no new money in 26, no new money in 27. This is a little bit smaller cut because again, we have carryover from this year. We reduce the cuts the following year. And again, we drop from that 4.5 down to 3.9.
Mr. Gertis, can you, and you probably said this at the meeting I missed, but why does the revenue, should both of these pass, why does the revenue start in the 2024 year and not the 23-24 year?
So just to be clear on your question, it starts in fiscal year 25 here, right?
I'm sorry, yep.
Yep, and not fiscal year 24.
Yep.
So yes, that's a great question. So the reason we aligned the new operating dollars, whether it's 302, 604, whatever that number is to align with the renewal of the existing operating referendum. If we did not do that, we would have 3 different expiration dates for operating referendum, and it would be very hard to manage from the board level going forward. So that's why we made these all contingent upon the renewal and all aligned with the same termination date, and so we could take advantage of the full 10-year allowance by state statute. Okay? And again, both of these questions, 3 contingent upon 2, question 2 contingent upon question 1.
And Mr. Gertis, the reason why we're talking about a third potential question is, I believe it was asked, what would the amount needed, what amount would be needed so that we basically would not have to make cuts? Is that correct? Or what would get us to basically a break-even level? Is that fair, or how was it asked?
I'll maybe refer to Jamie, but there was a few people that presented it, and then a couple board members, I believe Cassie and Jerry brought it up, and Jamie, if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it was very much that. It was by adding a third question, can we get to the point where we do not need to reduce any more? And this is one of those options, and option 5 and 6 actually take us into a better realm of that.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
One more thing to add to that too, Chad, just so that we're all clear on the same point. Yes, we wouldn't have to make cuts here in fiscal year 25, but with no new money and increased expenses in fiscal year 26 and 27, we would still continue to make cuts, right? That this is a 1-year reprieve.
Yeah. Mr. Rocha?
Sure, thank you. I'm sorry, Scott, I'm a little confused. When you say there's no new money, it would make cuts in 23, 24, no new money, but the levy is for 10 years. So can you explain for others why you're saying there's no new money?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that, Jerry. When I say new money, I refer to new revenue streams. So if we pass a revenue stream here, yes, it is good for 25, 26, 27, and right on out, right? But this takes into account the added revenue, right, that we have here, but we have new expenses. We don't have any additional revenue. Yes, so there's additional revenue here, but new means new issuances of revenue, either from the taxpayers or from the state.
Okay, thank you
Right.
for that clarification.
Ms. Cavalier?
Can we just clarify, if enrollment continues to go down in our district, we will still make right-sizing cuts to the budget?
Yes, I believe that would be the financial prudent thing to do, but ultimately that's your choice up here. But yes, that would be a recommendation, I would imagine, from Superintendent Benty.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, any other questions on option 4, renewal of existing operating referendum with 2 additional questions for $302 per pupil unit for each question, all contingent upon each other? Okay, I'm going to move on now to question number 5. The idea, one more twist into this scenario. So again, with option 5, we have the renewal here at the top for question 1. We have a tech levy in question 2. Okay? And then we have a operating referendum, again, based on the $90 house value for $302 per pupil unit. So what this does, Jerry, to your point, is it gives us new money here in 24, right, with the tech levy, and it gives us a new funding stream in 25 with the operating referendum. Does that make sense to everybody? So we get new money in 24, and we get additional new money in 25. And so you see the needed cuts here, $285,000, so pretty much break even, right? On a $45 million budget, that's nothing. And then we have some needed cuts in 25. And then again, there's no new money in 26 and 27, so that would be the same there. But here we drop from 3.96 million, 3.61.
Mr. Gertis, once again, question number 2, tech levy in this scenario is 100% dependent on the renewal passing. And question number 3, the 302 operating levy would be dependent on the tech levy and the renewal passing, correct?
That is not correct.
Not correct, okay.
The tech levy, because it is not an operating referendum, is not contingent upon the renewal. Because they have different funding mechanisms, and then we can have those out in different years. And that's why the tech levy, same as it was in option 3, we can get new money in fiscal year 24 and save some cuts here for next year. This $302 here, additional operating referendum, is contingent upon question 1, but question 2 stands out kind of by itself.
Okay, thank you. I
Does
appreciate that.
Make sense?
Yep.
Okay, good question, Chair.
Thank you.
Any other questions on option 5? Okay. So option 6, very similar to option 5, other than we have the operating referendum in position 2, question 2, contingent on the renewal, right? Because if we didn't do that, people could pick this one over the first one. And the tech levy in position 3, question 3 on the end. From a financial perspective down here, both assuming both passes, it doesn't make any difference. Where the difference comes into play is if you only had the second question pass and not the third question, option 5 would draw us more revenue than option 6, right? Because the tech levy will bring in about $400,000 more per year than this operating referendum over here. Any questions on that concept? So, sorry, Leanne, for poking you in the eye there.
Didn't even notice.
Then we have, again, we still have this $3.6 million total cut right here over 4 years.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, other than the renewal, the other questions, you would have a statement, increased taxes, right?
Yes,
So, other than the renewal.
other than the renewal. In the board packet, and I don't know if maybe Cassie can show you, in the board packet are the exact questions with the exact verbiage of what would go in front of the voters for each of those questions.
Mr. Olson, I printed it
It's not on this
Okay.
PowerPoint, Kathy, it's actually in
Oh, I'm sorry,
In
the
the-
options, yes.
in the options,
I read
yes.
those two. Okay.
Ms. Lechtenberg?
I was wondering if you could explain one more time the difference in funding to the school district between 5 and 6.
Yes, so let's back up and go to number 5. So let's start at the beginning here with the renewal, and I think we all probably are on the same page that the renewal actually maintains an existing funding stream of about $2.1 million that we have today. If that were to go away, it would increase, and somebody asked me this, I'm gonna go back here. To option 1, if we don't get this renewal, this number over here more than doubles. Because we would lose $2.1 million here, another $2.1 million here plus inflation, and yet another $2 million right there plus inflation. Okay? So option 5 starts with a renewal that maintains that $2.1 million. Oops, excuse me. And then it adds a tech levy. So again, the tech levy, again, specific uses as Mr. Olson asked earlier, is for technology needs and infrastructure of this district, and only that. But what that does is it frees up existing dollars that are currently being used to fund the infrastructure and technology needs for other things. And that's how it's an additional windfall for the district. So again, based on our $90 average house, by the time you back into that formula for all, again, remember net tax capacity, all property types nets us 1.366, I think it's 200 bucks, 1,366,200 into added revenue for the district, and that would go on for the next 10 years. Okay? Again, same as an operating referendum, you can only have a max of 10 years. Okay? The difference with a tech levy is you can go out and try and renew that tech levy within 5 years of the retirement of that debt, versus an operating referendum when you can only do it a year in advance. So that's a difference there too, but that's down the road.
Mr. Gertis, I don't mean to nitpick here, but you made a statement, windfall. I just want to make sure that we understand windfall doesn't mean we won the lottery and we have boatloads of cash to just throw around, right? Windfall here means we've gotten more money and it's going to reduce the amount of reductions needed, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
That
thank
is
you.
correct.
No, thank you. Mr. Robichaud.
Thank you. Just a couple of observations. And this is kind of a horror story. When you talk about the renewal levy, if that is not passed, God forbid, and we would look at $10 million in budget cuts, we would be knocking on the door of statutory operating debt, I'd assume.
If that were the case, we would probably be in statutory operating debt in fiscal year 26.
Mr. Robichaud, if the renewal wouldn't pass, right, I think all reality is this board, whatever the board is, would go out again next year. And if it didn't pass then, the board would likely have to go out again the following year. I mean, they'd have to go every year until they were able to get something passed, because you just can't deficit spend $12 million. It just doesn't work, right? So you would have to, and I think that's one of the urgencies of why this board is talking about looking at going out with a renewal now, so that if it did fail, we'd at least have one more shot at getting it renewed, and not essentially pushing all our chips in, if you will, or if you were a poker player and saying, we're going for broke. I think this board is trying to be prudent in making sure that that's not the case.
Absolutely. One more question, Mr. Chair, if I may. If I take a look at all the options you laid out, some minimized, but there is no way of eliminating total, not having any cuts during that 5-year period.
That is correct.
Unless we were to increase the per pupil request higher. But at this point, these options do not keep us away from making budget cuts.
That is correct. The other thing to Ms. Cavalier's point is that none of these models take into account right sizing as either,
Right,
right? The expenses, to Mr. Olson's question earlier, was, it's a straight 3%, right? And that's just for consistency and simplicity's sake. But as you guys are all aware, there's a lot more into it than that. So,
I just want to make sure we talked through Leanne's question all the way through. So just to confirm, option 5 and 6 are the same amount of money coming into the district if all 3 questions pass in either way, but it's a preference on which order the questions are placed in the ballot. So there's no difference in funding as long as they all 3 pass. It's
That
just which question we would like the voters to see second, and it just flips them.
so,
Does that make
so Ms. Cavalier is absolutely correct with that, Ms. Lechtenberg. The one piece here that we didn't finish talking about again here is the operating referendum that gets added, and so we see that extra funding stream here in fiscal year 25. To Ms. Cavalier's point, she is absolutely correct, is that if all of these questions pass, option 5 or 6 are neutral, right? They bring in the same amount of additional funding. If the second question passes and the third question does not pass, it's simply saying that we would have option 2 or option 3. The 2 questions, both of those pass, right? Without the third question actually passing. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah. We have to convince the public of all these options. I don't think it can be done. It's too complicated. Is there any way to simplify this? Like, we know that the renewal is time sensitive. So if we pass that this year, then next year, and if it passes, then next year we can go for a tech or operating levy or both, right? Is that possible?
That is very much a possibility.
Being an off year, we don't want to jeopardize, even though the best time is actually next year, but I realize that you're putting all your eggs in one basket. But one is time sensitive, the renewal. So if we get that in our basket, then we can actually next year do something more.
That's very, very possible. A couple things to keep in mind with that is you would be going out to the voters in 2 consecutive years, which statistically is not allow for a good percentage of passing. The other thing that would happen in next year in an off year is that the school district would need to run the election. So there would be an added, pretty large
But we've
added
talked
cost.
about that spread over 10 years.
Yep,
It's not much, even though it's all money, taxpayers' money, but it is spread over
yep,
agreed upon maximum of 10 years.
that is true.
But then a side issue, which I keep on bringing up, is the cross subsidies. Is that's handled at the state level, but that is something I think all boards should consider, fully fund cross subsidies. Am I wrong on that?
No, that would be awesome.
No, I think you're
Not up
dead
to us,
right,
though.
Mr. Olson. And I think the Superintendent Association, that I think we all heard from Mr. Sesker, they're working on that, but
We have to work harder as a board with other boards from Albert Lee, International Falls, to say, why don't you fully fund this?
I don't disagree with you one bit.
I didn't.
If I had the magic answer, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
Mr.
Sure,
Robichaud?
I hear what Mr. Olson is saying, and I totally agree that we need to get the cross-subsidy paid for or funded. I also think that MSBA and all of the organizations are working very diligently. I think they came very close to it this year. of getting some, not 100%, but some support from the legislature. Hopefully they will resurrect that and we can get that. If by chance we should get some, I think we have to deal with what we know right now. And I think that's what the options are that Scott brought forward. And if we should get some additional revenue from the state, be it cost subsidy or the increase the funding formula by 3% as opposed to 2%, we can always act on that when the time comes. But I think we have to deal with the facts we know right now to make a prudent decision.
Mr. Robichaud, I agree with you. And Mr. Olson, I do think you make a good point about keeping it simple. That's why we're going to hopefully go from 6 options to 1 option tonight, whatever that is. However, to your point, if one of these options that we do approve and that we want to take to the community to have them vote on has more than one question, it's our job, our district's job, to educate and message that in as clear as terms as possible. And you know, from serving on a school board for many years, school finance is as clear as mud. There's just nothing simple about it, and that's no fault of anybody's. That's the reality, right? So if we do tonight approve one of these resolutions that has more than one question, it's on all of us. How do we best communicate that in the simplest of terms? Because you're right, the average person, that's not to knock them at all. We sit here and we hear this meeting in and meeting out, and at times it's difficult for us to understand, right? So that's tough, and that's on, like I said, that's on our administration, that's on our whatever committee, and that's on our everybody that's out there messaging it. So, Mr.
Chair,
Bellingham?
if I may, so to have clarity here, just for those watching and the general public and the board here, so how you have them listed is the order in which they must be approved in each option. So renewal needs to be approved, then tech levy, then $302, correct? And the next option, I know there was one, you said it didn't matter if the tech levy passed, but that's how I'm interpreting it. So, for example, option 5, renewal, tech levy, and 302 operating referendum. So renewal, question 1 has to pass, correct? Question 2, the tech levy passes. Question 3, the 302 operating levy passes. If the tech levy does not pass, then the 302 does pass, then the 302 is null and void. Am I interpreting that correct?
No, that is not. Sorry, that is not
Okay.
correct, John. With the tech levy, since it's again based on a different taxing structure, it is not tied in any way, shape, or form to the existing renewal of the existing operating referendum or any additional referendum dollars that might be connected to an existing option. So in that option 5, in your example, we could have the renew pass, we could have the technology fail, but the operating referendum in question, position 3, could pass
Right.
as long as it's hooked to question 1. Okay?
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes. And then also the second last question I have is the $302 amount is the $90 tax increase on a $250,000 home.
That is correct.
Okay, and then we double that with the 604 would be $180, correct? I just want to make that clear. I think it's important to the public, members of the public know that or whatever. So it's not 600, my taxes are not going to go up $604 on that particular item. It's not going to go up $302 or whatever. It's $90 or $180 or whatever, and like that. And as Chair Wolf said, that is up to the levy committee, whatever, to make sure that message is out there exactly what our voters know. So, and thank you for the answer. I have that operation now in order, and also I just want to make certain that everyone knows the dollar amount there. So, thank you.
Everything you just said was accurate.
Okay, probably not. But
And Mr. Gertis, to follow up on Mr. Bellingham's comments there, the $90 on an annual basis for a $252,000 home, the average value in Faribault, that equates to $7.50, I think, a month.
Correct.
That 180 would equate to $15 a month. So just so people have a number of what does that look like on a annual basis and also on a monthly basis, should those pass. So, other questions for Mr. Gerdes regarding any one of these 6 options? Mr. Gerdes, once again, thank you for walking us
I
through
have
these.
just a couple additional slides here, just to kind of put this in
Okay.
a pictorial thing for those of you that are more like pictures. So this slide represents all the different options. You can see the key at the top. The one thing to note is that option 5 and option 6 lay on top of each other with the green line, because again, they represent the same number of dollars. The top black line is current board policy, 9.5%. Bottom black line is state statute SOD. And you can see at the end of the day that the green line with the blue underneath it is actually option 5 there, that shows what that would do for the next 4 years. Okay, does that help in any way, shape, or form? The next slide here is just, again, a pictorial of total cuts needed. So you can see those numbers that I talked about here, they're here at the bottom. Again, on pictorial form, option 1 through option 6 here at the end.
So, Mr. Gerdes, with regards to Ms. Lechtenberg's question earlier, in that slide you just showed, 5 and 6, basically the same amount of money, actually the same amount of money. However, that's with the assumption that all 3 questions would pass. If you want to minimize the amount of reductions that would be needed should one question fail, option 5 is the best route of between 5 and 6. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
From a financial standpoint.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm done.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, board members, other questions for Mr. Gerdes or Mr. Benty? Mr. Olson.
What is our auditor saying on this whole, all these options, and, or do they have a say or not?
So our current financial auditors really are not part of this process. The 2 people that we rely upon the most is our financial advisor, which is Ehlers, right? And you've heard Jeff speak here a couple different times at various board meetings over the last 3-4 months, as well as the attorney that wrote the resolutions.
I know they want our fund balance to be bigger, 15, 20%. I've heard that.
So auditors recommend a 15% fund balance. That's what any auditing firm would recommend for a district of this size, right, based on our cash flow needs.
Then, if the election doesn't go right, what about our credit rating to borrow money?
So there's a lot of questions inside of that question, Mr. Olson. So if we end up with a lower credit rating because our fund balance goes down, that would obviously increase our cost to borrow. If the board needs to change fund balance policy to stay above fund balance policy because we don't have cash, that will affect our borrowing as well, our credit rating. And that will also increase the cost. Obviously, if we're in SOD, we're going to move several points on the respective bond rating companies' scales.
Because there was many years where the state borrowed money or stole money from our districts. And then we had to borrow, even though that we were doing fine, but all of a sudden the state says, we don't have the money. So that could affect us, right?
Absolutely, it could. It's kind of another reason we want to keep that 9.5%. In the event that the state didn't necessarily steal the money, they just kind of borrowed it interest-free. for a period of time, and then eventually gave it back. But yes, they did put the burden on a lot of districts, and I think that happened in 2013. It also happened in 2006 when I was in Rochester and had to go through the same issues there of borrowing money.
Board members, any other questions regarding the 6 options that Mr. Gord has presented on? Okay, so like we said, we have flexibility here. We do not have to go in order 1 through 6. If somebody has an option they would like to make a motion on, the floor is open, and I'll entertain a motion to approve any 1 through 6.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Olson.
I would. Could you put option 2 on the, make sure I. Oh, no,
You want 3?
there, 3, sorry. 3, option 3. I would make a motion for this year, option 3.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Olson to put option 3, which translates into, if my numbers are correct here, Resolution 23-10. He has made a motion to approve that item. Do we have a second? I'll ask again, do we have a second? Okay, not hearing a second, I believe that motion dies without having a second. Fails to pass, I guess. So, with that said, I believe, Mr. Bellingham, I will look to you, since it's a resolution. Do we need to do a roll call for 23-10 and have Ms. Steves record that? Do you believe we do?
No, because there's no motion and a second.
There's no second. There was a motion, but not a second.
There's no
Okay.
motion to act upon.
Okay, I'm just
No.
trying to make sure we do this in correct form.
Right.
Okay, so essentially, that is item number 8 that we discuss. Mr. Olson, thank you for that motion. I will entertain if there's any other motion out there.
Mr. Chair, I'll move for number 10, option 5, please.
Number 5.
I'll move, I'll move to approve Resolution 23-12.
So, Mr. Gertis, would you be so kind to pull that up there, please? Just I want to make sure Mr. Bellingham is looking at that correctly. Is that it, Mr. Bellingham?
That is correct.
Okay. So, Mr. Bellingham has made the motion to approve option number 5, which is the renewal, the tech levy, and the 302 operating referendum. So 3 questions total. My understanding is the only difference between, I'll save that for a second here. Do we have a second for this?
Second.
I'm sorry, who was that? Mr. Robichaud. Okay. We have a motion by Mr. Bellingham, a second by Mr. Robichaud for option number 5. Further discussion on this item? Okay, I'll get to my comments here. I believe the only difference here between this and the one that Mr. Olson had motioned for was that there was a third question, which is the 302, and the voters have an option to vote on that third option, yes or no.
That is accurate.
Okay.
Again, in this scenario, question 3 of option 5 is contingent upon the renewal of the existing operating referendum as it stands today.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments?
Mr.
Discussion?
Chair, thank you. I'll speak in favor of my motion here. In looking at the funding projections, and once again, I just want to thank you. I think this has been done expertly, very professionally, laid out all the way through the year 2027, so within 5 years, if we don't do something. Okay, or
Thank you.
if we do things minimally. Each and every individual board member up here in February or March, when we've had to cast our vote to approve budget reductions, has made statements like, this is the toughest thing I've had to do. This is difficult. I hate cutting teachers. I hate cutting paras. I hate cutting custodians. I hear that from each and every individual board member. I know it's difficult out there. Very difficult for our homeowners, for our taxpayers, et cetera. My goal here is to maintain and increase funding so we can continue the programs we have here in Faribault Public Schools. It will take some sacrifice, but for the good of public education, for the good of the whole, I think it's important that we acknowledge, and we have acknowledged, that we do not have the funds necessary to continue these. We're reaching out and asking the community, will you support us in our quest to maintain and continue to improve our instruction to Faribault Public School students? That's why I believe, in examining these many times, many hours, in option 5.
Thank you, Mr. Bellingham. Mr. Robichaud.
Mr. Chair, I'll speak to the motion as well. Very appropriately stated, Mr. Billingham. I also think that it's very important for the community to know that this district is very fiscally responsible, that the district is not out there spending dollars and projecting and developing things that we can't afford. I think we've addressed and continue to address the educational needs of all of our students. And we cannot continue to do it given the limited resources we have. And I think we have a moral imperative to make a decision that's best for our students. And that is, in fact, search for ways that we can increase the revenue so we can continue to be diligent in the budget process, thanks to the staff here at Faribault, as well as continue to offer the programs that our students are entitled to.
Thank you, Mr. Robichaud. Other comments, questions? I'll just add a little more to this. I think if we do put this out there in front of the voters, it does give them an opportunity to chime in and say if they want our students to fall further behind or stay where we're at. You've shown numerous times where we're at with regards to our peers in the Big Nine in terms of tax-based support. Remind me, are we at the bottom or near the bottom?
The last comparison, we were at the bottom.
At the bottom. Thank you. So we may pass one question, we may pass two, we may pass three, we may pass 0. But this clearly states that this board recognizes that we do need to do something to increase our revenue. And the job of us is to educate the community on why. And then the call is the communities. And so, once again, I thank everybody. And I just want to stress, the only difference between this and the proposal that Mr. Olson put forth was simply that this gets us closer to a balance versus not. And there's nothing set in stone. This board, all we are doing is approving the question to the voter, to the taxpayer. We are not instituting anything without their approval. Anything else, anyone? Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Bellingham, a second by Mr. Robichaud. Ms. Steves, I believe, because this is Resolution 23-12, that we'll need to do a roll call.
John Bellingham.
Aye.
Courtney Cavalier.
Aye.
Leon Lechtenberg.
Aye.
Richard Olson.
No.
Jerry Robichaud.
Aye.
Cassie Steves. No. Chad Wolf.
Aye.
Passes 5-2.
Okay, thank you. So that is what we will go forward with to the public, the community, and we'll work with Mr. Gertis, Mr. Benty, whatever you need with regards to any language with the state and whatever that looks like. So then, I guess, we have these other action items on here. I guess we do need to go through them. So I'm going to now go back to number 5, I guess, which would be Resolution 23-08. We'll go through the 4 that we did not. And if there simply is not a motion for them, we'll move on. If there is a motion for them, we'll proceed, but I think we can have one. So with that said, I'll entertain a motion to consider approval of Resolution 23-08.
Could, as we go through, could he
Absolutely.
put one on?
Yep,
If you
absolutely.
would, please.
Absolutely. This is option number 1, the renewal only. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 23-08?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Olson to approve Resolution 23-08, which is the renewal only. Is there a second? Okay, hearing none, that motion fails to advance. This brings us to item number 7, consider approval of Resolution 23-09, which would be the renewal plus the $302 operating levy. Do we have a motion to approve? Without hearing anything, that motion fails to move on. We did Resolution 23-10. That's the one that, no, I'm sorry.
Go back to 3.
Yes. Isn't this the one you initially
Yes. That's
made a
right.
motion? Okay. We did this one, and Mr. Olson made the motion. We did not have a second. It failed to move on. It brings us to Resolution 23-11, which is the renewal plus the 2 $302 operating levies, which would be a question 2 and 3, which totals the $604. Is there a motion to approve this?
I'll make a motion.
Ms. Steves has made a motion to approve Resolution 23-11. Is there a second? Just for clarification, sorry, I don't want a discussion, clarification, the difference between this and number 5 is this has 2 operating levies, 0 tech levy.
That is correct.
Still would be 3 questions.
That is also correct.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Ms. Steves has made a motion. Is there a second? Okay, hearing no second, that motion fails to move on. This board has already approved Resolution 23-12 on a 5-2 vote, which now brings us to Resolution 23-13, otherwise known as Option 6, which is the renewal plus the 302 operating referendum plus the tech levy. Is there a motion to approve this? Okay, hearing none. Resolution 23-13 fails to move on as there was no motion to approve. That brings us to item number 12, which is an adjournment. Do we have a motion to approve the adjournment?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion by Ms. Steves, a second by Ms. Cavalier. Once again, I'd like to thank Mr. Gertis, Mr. Benty, all of your teams that have worked on this. I'd like to thank the board for all of your efforts and questions and investigations on this and due diligence, asking questions. Greatly appreciated. And with that, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, motion passes 6-1 to adjourn. We're now adjourned.